Welcome back to another episode of the Property Management Show. I'm your host, Marie Tepman from 4.5 Marketing Agency. Over the last decade, we have dedicated ourselves to helping property managers like you grow their businesses by getting more owner leads from marketing. Whether you need help with a website, SEO, content, reputation management, paid ads like pay-per-click, you name it, we could help you. Visit our website 4andhalf.com to get started on long-term growth today. That's FOURANDHALF.com. Today's guest is a longtime 4.5 client, and he runs a successful property management business in Northern California called Bayside Management and Leasing. It's none other than Jeff Hacker, and it's actually his birthday today. Welcome to the show, Jeff, and happy birthday.
Thank you, Marie. It's good to be back.
Yeah, it feels like it's been forever. It feels like a world away since we last had you as a guest.
Yes, it's been, I think, 2, maybe 3 years. I think it was right before COVID hit that the last time I was there, and I was in person with you and Brittany. So it's quite a change to do this stuff remotely.
Yeah, definitely. And, you've been a long time client. You've been in the industry for a very long time, right? In fact, I believe you started in like 2004?
Yes, 2003 is sort of when I got started here with Bayside, though Bayside has been around for almost 30, 40 years now. But I really got started in 2003, so it's been 20 years now.
Yeah, I mean, when you hear the number, it sounds big, but bet doesn't feel that way, huh?
No, it doesn't. The time passed very quickly.
Yeah, and so, given that you started in around 2003, you obviously were there during the great financial meltdown of '07 to '09. So, can you give our audience a bit of color into how that crisis unfolded, in your business, kind of like when you were in property management back then?
So, that's actually going back a number of years, right? It's like 10 years plus, trying to go back to try to remember on that. From what I recall, it started out actually fairly slowly at first. You started, I keep, pretty good track of trends that are going on in the industry, especially as it pertains to real estate, since that's kind of the core business here. And so, over time, you started seeing like default rates go up, and you started seeing, more negative news in terms of, people not being able to make mortgages. You started to become late on mortgages, default rates going up and stuff like that. So, you sort of had an inkling that something might be going on. At the time, though, you didn't really know how severe it was going to be. And I think most people are fairly optimistic, when they look at these types of things and then say, oh, yeah, we've gone through these cycles before, this is not unusual, right? You had the savings and loan debacle, a few years prior to that. And so I think most people feel like, oh yeah, this is just sort of one of those things that, will pass in a fairly short period of time. It's not going to be anything significant, right? But then as time wore on, 2007 wore on, 2008, 2009, it became, truly catastrophic, and the significance of it, I think, was pretty widespread, and people became pretty aware of it, but it was well into it before people really became aware of truly what was going on. From a property management point of view, I mean, we're sort of lucky in some respects because while there's no industry that is, truly recession proof, I would have to say that property management in general can probably weather it better than most companies or industries can, simply because people need a place to live, right? So if they're not owning a house, right, then they're renting is really what it comes down to. I mean, yeah, you have quite a few people that live on the streets, the homeless, which is unfortunate. But for the most part, it's either people who own a house or they're renting. So from that point of view, property management is slightly insulated, though not completely insulated, from the effects of that. But what we saw that kind of clued us into a lot of this is that as it was slowly unfolding sort of early in, we started getting applications for the vacancies where people had like defaults, they owned a home, but, they admitted that they were in default or that they had a home that foreclosed on them and various things like that. So we started getting a lot of applications for that. And then we started, digging into it, it's like, well, it shows that you have a foreclosure, you don't meet our credit, criteria, what's going on. And then that's when they would say, it was like, well, we purchased the home, it was an income only loan, type of thing. And then, you know, interest rates started going up. We couldn't afford it anymore. And then all of a sudden you had the home value decrease. And so, we owed more on the house and the house was worse. So we just walked away from it. Right. And a lot of these people put down maybe 5%. Some even had, no down payments that they had to put into it. So there was really no skin in the game for a lot of these people, right? It's just like, oh, I borrowed 100% of the mortgage and, the house is worth less than what the mortgage is. So what's the point of me, sticking around this house making a payment? I might as well just walk away. And that's what a lot of people did. So,
Yeah. And so, so you were describing kind of like how it slowly unfolded and kind of the red flags that were coming up, right? As this whole crisis was happening. So, as you mentioned, property management is a unique industry that even though it's not 100% recession proof, it could still be affected. What were some of the things that you and your team, you learned living through a crisis like that?
well, one of the things that, we definitely learned was to be, significantly more proactive, with landlords, or clients, right? Giving them a heads up as to really what's going on and what the potential implications may mean because of this, right? Um, you know, what transpired with the financial meltdown, it occurred along with the recession. So you had a lot of job layoffs, right? Sometimes this stuff happens, sometimes it doesn't. But one of the things that we should have been more prepared for was the number of job layoffs and then what that meant in terms of vacancies, right? So it's like, if somebody loses their job, they might be okay for a month or two, but then the likelihood is that they'll either vacate the place because they'll move back in with parents or they'll move in with friends of theirs so that they can consolidate debt. Or, they took a job out of state, out of the city, out of state, and then they moved entirely to wherever the new job is. And since, the business environment was also hit and you had a lot of layoffs, that meant that you probably were sitting on vacancies, far longer than what you normally would. And then not only that, you probably would have to rent them out at a rent that was less than what you were just recently getting. So it would have been, we should have been more proactive with our owners, to let them know that this is what's coming and here's what you can expect. You can probably expect longer vacancies and probably less rents than what you were getting. The other thing that we could have done too is probably work with the owners a little bit more diligently in terms of, getting them to maybe reduce a tenant's rent, right? In terms of so that you could then keep the tenant as opposed to losing the tenant. Yes, you're going to get less rent, but you're also not going to sit on a vacancy then because, you're forced the tenant out because the tenant can't afford to live there.
And so you mentioned, like large layoffs and, its effect on vacancies. And you manage properties in, the kind of the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, where a lot of the tech companies that are laying off workers reside. Has your business been affected? And what proactive measures has your company taken to prepare your owners about any potential like ripple effects of this?
So that's a good question. So one of the things that we've done is, this time around, we have been proactive with our owners in letting them know that, you do have a massive amount of layoffs happening in the tech sector here. So that's potential that could impact the tenant base where, somebody gets laid off and then they decide that they're going to move out of the area to take a job somewhere else. I mean, there's a lot of jobs that have been lost to Texas, Florida, South Carolina. So there's been a lot of, migration out of this area and out of California to those areas where there's some growth. But at the same token, here in California, there's been a lot of startups that have been around. And so a lot of the people that have been laid off are finding jobs fairly quickly, with smaller companies and staying in the area. But we did bring it to the attention of the owners that we have that this is a possibility. They should be prepared for this, and that instead of raising the rents, they should either consider holding rents flat or maybe even giving them a break for a year and dropping the rent as an incentive to keep them in place, as opposed to potentially losing somebody. So we did reach out to our owners to let them know that. And we've actually got a fairly positive response from our owners when we've done that. So that was a good thing.
Did you encounter any owners that pushed back and essentially just fired you because they're like, lowering rent? That's crazy.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. We haven't lost any accounts yet because of it, but we have had a number of owners who pushed back. And, unfortunately there's, a number of owners everywhere that are trying to maximize, the value of their investment. So, every year they're trying to get rent increases, out of their tenants and out of the properties that they manage, which, makes sense. I mean, every year costs go up. If you take a look at what's going on with inflation, over the last, year and a half, I mean, it's impacted everybody, including landlords. Property taxes go up, insurance goes up, basic maintenance goes up, right? Water bills go up, garbage bills go up. So they want to make sure that, they have those costs covered and that they're still getting, a good return on investment. So it's not surprising that we had, a handful of owners push back.
I mean, it's good to know that even though there were owners who pushed back, it wasn't as bad as like actually losing them. It sounds like once you actually explain kind of the big picture, they were on board, right?
Yes,
Good.
definitely. Once you give them a nice big picture view of truly what's going on, I think most of them truly understand it. And then, it's sometimes easy to, make the numbers really work and speak for themselves. You're right. If you're holding out to get $300 more a month, but it's going to take you 4 months to fill that vacancy instead of, dropping the rent and filling it in 30 days. I mean, that math, speaks for itself fairly quickly. So, and most of the owners that we have, understand that and they see that big picture view.
Yeah, it's good. It's good when you're able to paint the big picture, right? Because, real estate investing is a long-term game, right? So reminding your owners about that is really critical. Um, and so, given that we're all at the cusp of this new recession, is there anything as a business owner that like keeps you up at night that you're worried about?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, like in 2008, 2009, we had a lot of investors, leave to self-manage, their own properties, just because they needed to save costs and stuff like that. And so, even though the services themselves are, in my opinion, not that expensive and worth the investment that you make because, your property managers are the professionals, they know what's going on, they keep up with all the changes in regulations and so on and so forth. Some owners just needed to save that $100 or $200 a month. And so they self-manage. So one of the things that we did differently again this year too, is we worked with our owners and we had what we called an outreach program to try to minimize churn. So that's one of the growth objectives that we have for this year is to try to minimize, the churn that you have, right? So, we had an outreach program and reached out to all of our owners, just kind of saying, hi, here's what's going on, here's, what's happening in the industry and stuff like that, to just kind of give them a heads up. And that if it seemed like they were sort of cost sensitive, we even potentially work with them a little bit, maybe to reduce our fees, to kind of give them a break for a little bit as a way to just kind of keep them on board. So,
Yeah, that's really interesting. So, well, first, I've been hearing that a lot from other property management companies, this like proactive outreach to owners, because most of the time owners hear from you when something goes wrong with a property. That's never good. And so you want to kind of change that association with like when you call, it's not always, bad. Sometimes you just want to talk about your goals and the growth of your portfolio. And so my first question is like, when did you start doing that and how did you implement it? Because then, it's one thing to say the company's going to do it. It's another to figure out like, well, who's going to do it in the company? How do we make sure that it's being done properly? The talking points are, are good.
right. Yeah, we started that probably right around the end of the summer last year, like the August, September timeframe is when we did that. And before we did that, though, is we had a complete staff training. So where we, produced sort of the script ahead of time. So, here's the script, here's how we want this to go, here's your talking points. And then what we did is we sat down, as a group, went through it, had a couple of practice sessions. And then the person that reached out to the owner is the person who has the best relationship. So for the most part here at Bayside, we have a portfolio management where each property manager has their own properties that they're responsible for. So most of the outreach happened with the property manager and the client. Some of them I got involved in just because they're bigger clients. They have multiple properties with us. And so oftentimes, I would reach out to those clients and go through the same script.
Yeah, I think that's really important to train people. I think it's very tempting as a business owner to just assume, oh, people know what to do, people know what to talk about. And so to hear that you actually had a whole team training, you kind of did practice sessions, like mock owner conversations, I feel like it's really helpful. And so the other piece that you mentioned was, oh, it was the tip of my tongue. And then what was it? So you talked about like proactive. Oh, okay. Okay. So that's really good that you scheduled in like a team session where you trained people on the talking points. You even had like mock conversations to simulate what it would be like. So I feel like that's really powerful and actionable. Another thing you mentioned was in some instances you offered to lower your management fee so that owners would stay. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, that's probably going to be pretty surprising to quite a few people out there. But I mean, we do have some investors out there that have always been sort of very cost conscious, right? They are willing to put into the properties what they need to put into the properties to keep them, in decent shape. But they're not ones to necessarily go out and remodel it and bring in all the latest amenities and various things like that for what people are truly looking for today. And so, from our experience in 2008, 2009, it's a lot of those people then that, left us because, they were concerned about costs and wanted to make sure that they kept the cost for the property, at a minimum. So, we kind of identified, in our, client base who those, potential clients may be. And so, we reached out to them, and talked to them about what's going on and stuff like that. We didn't proactively offer to drop our rates with them. But if it seemed like, they were sort of on the cusp and they may consider, leaving because they need to save costs, then, we, talked to them about maybe dropping our fees for a short period of time to kind of weather the storm and stuff like that. And that was only a very, very small handful of clients that we had to do that with.
Yeah, I feel like that's really interesting because, like the industry is becoming more and more conscious about key metrics. And you mentioned that churn is a metric that your company wants to improve this year. And so it sounds a lot like you're very proactive. You had already identified the people in your client base that would be susceptible to churning. And then you already had this plan in place so that once you had that proactive owner conversation, if it seemed like they're, kind of on the fence about staying or leaving, you kind of your people had this in their back pocket, so to speak.
Right. They did. Yeah. And, from my perspective, I mean, when you take a look at it, I think 4.5 has done a really good job in looking at, sort of the cost of acquisition, right? And, you've got, your marketing programs, you potentially have a salesperson, you have your Google AdWords, if you go out and, purchase an existing portfolio, at some point in time, you need to sit down and take a look at, well, what did that really cost me? Right. And I think for a lot of people, I think they'll find that, the cost of acquiring a new account is probably somewhere between $2,000 and $3,000, to acquire that account. The lifetime value is probably 3 to 4 times that, which is good. So it still makes sense. But when you look at potentially, dropping your fees, this margin doesn't have to be significant. It can be a very small amount. When you look at it from that point of view, it's an existing customer, you've had them for a long time. You don't want to lose them. And so, I look at it as sort of the reverse where, yeah, it's like the cost of acquisition, it's a cost of staying, but that cost of staying is less than what you pay to acquire a new client. So it's, to me, it's a benefit. I mean, if you can get away not having to do it, even better. But it's less expensive than going out and trying to acquire a new client. And then in this business, it's a very competitive business, right? Everybody's, going after, the self-managed, everybody's trying to find the investors, everybody's trying to grow their business. And so it's a very competitive business. So if it's a small price to pay to keep your existing client base, I think it's worth it.
Out of curiosity, how did you create boundaries around that offer? So let's say an owner was at risk of churning, and then your team offered this like reduction in management fees to kind of help them to stay. Was there, obviously there has to be some caveat. Is it like discounted forever, or was it
No,
like, yeah?
no, the most that we ever did it for was just 1 year, right? So we offered to just reduce, the rate, that we charge just for 1 year. And really it was just designed to sort of get over this potential inflation hump, potential recession that might be coming or might not be coming, right? So it was just a way to sort of get over that. And another way to kind of get over potentially having to reduce rents, or maybe not get a rent increase, right? Keeping rents flat. So it was a way to sort of, work through those potential issues. As far as identifying those people, that was really largely based on the relationships that each of the property managers have with the clients. And, they've worked with these clients for a number of years, so they have a pretty good idea of, sort of the sentiment that these clients have, sort of what their attitudes are for this, that, or whatever else. And so for those, it was kind of based on their recommendations that, when we had this outreach program, they may be one of the ones that, we want to potentially have this available for if we need to use.
Yeah, that's really great information. And so you obviously keep a very close eye to the current trends in the market and kind of try to project what's coming down the line. And in fact, the last time we had you on the podcast, you were talking about the trends in the industry. So it's been a couple of years since now. What has changed? And what are things that other property management professionals or people who are thinking of starting in property management should look out for?
Oh boy, that's a big question. There's a lot of things that have changed, for sure. You know, number one is you had a lot of people, sort of chasing investment properties, right? I mean, you had big pocketed people, you have, marginally pocketed people, you had small pocketed people, but everybody was trying to, purchase those homes, right? You had the famous example of what happened with Zillow, right? In the sort of the crash with Zillow. But you had a lot of people, going after these properties for investments, which, obviously drove up, property values substantially, around the country and, a little more so in certain pockets where it was, those were the more desirable cities to be in, for example, right? And so it just got to the point where it just wasn't feasible anymore, right? Home prices couldn't keep going up. There's only so much in the market, that kind of stuff. These people that were buying homes were keeping, first-time home buyers from being able to get in the market, et cetera, right? So that was one of the big things that, really happened, which, if you got in on that, good for you, right? As a property management company, if your, city was one of those where you had a lot of investors coming in, if you had the right outreach, right marketing tools, you probably did very well in acquiring a lot of accounts, which is a good thing, right? But again, that's, not sustainable at any stretch of imagination. It gets to the point where, the rents that you get, don't even cover your cost anymore. And so a lot of the small investors, it's probably not a tenable long-term position for them. Whereas for like the big pocketed investors, they probably don't care as much because, carrying a loss is okay, as it helps them to write off out of gains, right? So it just kind of depends on that. The other big trend that has certainly happened, over the last 3 to 5 years is just the automation. Everything's become automated, right? From, showing vacancies, to, management platforms that, operate on for accounting, for, work orders, name it. So everything's become automated, which is a good thing. So that makes, the user experience for owners better. It makes the user experience for tenants a lot better. It gives them another platform to communicate, and then, more importantly, it allows the management company to really, track and show to the owners, all the work that's being done on the properties, because it's all sort of there captured in one area.
Yeah. And so along with this automation comes this notion that it's easy, right? Because if you could just sign up for a few pieces of software and then basically do what a property manager does, then it adds the competitiveness of the industry, because you're not just competing with other property management companies. You have to compete with the notion of self-management that's become so easy because of automation.
That's true. That's true. People think of it that way, but unfortunately, it really isn't, right? There's still a lot of things that you need to know in terms of just how the software operates, what benefits can you get from it, how you can deploy it, how it benefits the owner from, making things more efficient for the property owner, how it benefits the tenants and gives the tenants a much better experience and making things more efficient for them, so that they feel like, inquiries into the management company are responded to timely, for example.
Yeah. And so given all the changes in the environment since we last spoke, and given the fact that we're all at the cusp of a new recession, are you expecting a lot of growth for your company in the next couple of years? And if so, why and what are you doing about it?
Yeah, yeah, I'd like to say that, yeah, I'm expecting, really big growth. But, the reality is that every year I try to focus on growing the company at least 5 to 10%, right? And in previous years, we were pretty successful in always being able to do that, especially from like 2010 into like 2020, 22 even to some degree. So it was, pretty easy to do that. We've always sort of had a focus on trying to keep our client base, but this year in particular, we're really focusing on trying to maintain our client base, because, that's also another good way of growth, right? So you may not get 5 to 10% new clients. Let's say you only get 3% new clients, but you save, 3% of your clients. In effect, that's like a 6% growth, right? So we're really focused on trying to maintain our existing base is what we're doing. So, and, I'd like to think that we could get, still 5 to 10%, but, it's a very competitive industry. So we'll see.
Yeah, I think that's a really insightful thing that you brought up. A lot of people who talk about growing a property management company hyper focus on getting new customers in without paying enough attention to, are you keeping the customers you already have? So it's basically the leaky bucket, right? You keep filling the bucket, but then you're not really paying attention to the leaking. So you keep thinking like, why do I keep filling it and never gets full? And it's because you're not paying attention to everything else.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's not just, you just can't focus on marketing and sales. You actually have to spend, a lot of time, probably even more time, focusing on the customer service, right? Because once you have them as a client, you want to make sure that you can maintain them as a client. And, this is a service business. So, the only way you can do that is providing, really top-notch customer service until their client can do their property.
Yeah, very well said. And so thank you so much, Jeff, for sharing those insights and learnings with us, as well as giving us an overview of the big trends to look out for in property
My pleasure,
management.
as always. Thank you.
That's a wrap for this episode of the Property Management Show, brought to you by 4.5, the marketing agency that keeps your property management business booming. From websites, SEO, to content creation, reputation management, even pay-per-click advertising and social media, we do it all. Visit our website, 4andhalf.com, that's FOURANDHALF.com, to get your business booming today. Again, if you are enjoying this podcast, please go ahead and leave us a review. Show us some love on your favorite podcast app so that others can find us too. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.